The summer morning of July 23, 2013 would change Prince William forever. He woke up at 5 in the morning, unable to sleep. His wife Kate had been in labor for hours at St. Mary's Hospital in London. William had been pacing the hospital corridors, drinking cup after cup of tea from plastic cups. His hands were shaking not from the caffeine, but from pure excitement and fear. When the doctors finally told him that his son had arrived safely, William felt his knees go weak. He sat down on the nearest chair and put his head in his hands. For a moment, he forgot he was a prince. He forgot about the cameras waiting outside. He forgot about the entire world watching. All he could think about was that tiny person who had just entered the world. The first time William held Prince George, everything went quiet around him. The busy sounds of the hospital disappeared. The voices of doctors and nurses faded away. There was just this small, warm bundle in his arms. George weighed only 8 pounds and 6 ounces, but to William, he felt like the most precious thing in the universe. William looked down at his son's tiny face and whispered hello. George opened his eyes for just a moment, as if he was trying to see who was talking to him. William's eyes filled with tears. He had never felt love like this before. It was different from loving Kate, different from loving his family. This was something new and overwhelming. Kate watched from her hospital bed, tired but glowing with happiness. She saw how carefully William held their baby, how his big hands seemed so gentle and protective. She knew in that moment that William would be an amazing father. He already looked like he never wanted to let George go. The next challenge came when they had to leave the hospital. William knew that hundreds of photographers and reporters were waiting outside. He knew the whole world wanted to see the new prince. But suddenly, William felt terrified. How could he carry something so small and fragile through all that chaos? Kate had already been wheeled to the car, but William insisted on carrying George himself. The hospital staff offered to help, but William shook his head. This was something he needed to do as a father. He practiced walking with George 3 times inside the hospital, making sure his steps were steady and his grip was secure. When the hospital doors opened, the noise hit them like a wall. Cameras clicked thousands of times per second. People shouted questions and congratulations. William felt George stir in his arms and immediately became protective. He walked slowly and carefully, one hand supporting George's head, the other holding him close to his chest. The car seat had been installed and checked by experts, but William wanted to put George in himself. His hands were shaking again as he tried to figure out the straps and buckles. It seemed like the simplest thing in the world, but suddenly William could not remember how it worked. He took a deep breath and started over. Kate watched from the front seat, smiling at how concentrated William looked. She could see him counting the clicks of the buckles, making sure everything was perfectly tight, but not too tight. When he finally stepped back, he checked the straps one more time, then leaned down and kissed George's forehead. As they drove away from the hospital, William kept turning around to look at George sleeping peacefully in his car seat. The baby seemed so calm, as if he had no idea that his entire life would be different from other children. William made a silent promise that he would try to give George as normal a childhood as possible. That evening, when they were finally home and alone, William sat in the nursery holding George. The room was quiet except for the sound of George's tiny breathing. William realized that everything had changed. He was not just Prince William anymore. He was someone's father. Someone was depending on him completely. He looked down at George and whispered, "We are going to figure this out together, little man." The phone call came on a quiet Thursday evening in September 2022. Prince William was helping 9-year-old George with his homework at their kitchen table, while Kate was upstairs reading bedtime stories to Charlotte and Louis. When his phone rang and he saw his father's name on the screen, William felt his stomach drop. Calls this late were never good news. Charles's voice was heavy when he told William that the Queen's doctors were very concerned. Her condition had gotten worse throughout the day. William needed to come to Balmoral Castle in Scotland right away. The family might not have much time left with her. William hung up the phone and sat quietly for a moment. George looked up from his math problems and asked if everything was okay. William forced a smile and said they would talk about it soon. He needed to figure out how to tell his children that their beloved Gan might be leaving them forever. That night, after putting the children to bed, William and Kate sat together in their living room. They talked for hours about how to explain death to their young children. George was old enough to understand some things, but Charlotte was only 7 and Louis was just 4. How do you tell a 4-year-old that the most important person in their world might not wake up tomorrow? The next morning brought the news they had been dreading. Queen Elizabeth had passed away peacefully in her sleep. William felt like a little boy again, wanting to cry for his grandmother who had always been his anchor. But he also knew he had to be strong for his own children now. William decided to tell the children together in their favorite room, the cozy living room where they watched movies and played board games. He sat on the big sofa with Charlotte on one side and Louis on the other. George sat in the armchair across from them, somehow sensing that this was a serious conversation. William started by reminding them of all the wonderful times they had spent with Gan. He talked about the tea party she hosted just for them, with tiny sandwiches and cakes. He mentioned the horse rides she took them on around Windsor Castle. He reminded them how she always had special chocolates hidden in her purse just for them. Then William's voice got softer. He told them that Gan had been very old and very tired. Her body had gotten too weak to keep going. She had gone to sleep and would not wake up anymore. She had gone to heaven to be with their great-grandfather Philip, who had died the year before. Charlotte was the first to speak. Her eyes filled with tears as she asked if the Queen was sad to leave them. William's own voice cracked as he pulled her closer and said that Gan was not sad because she knew they would always remember her and love her. She was watching over them from heaven now. Louis, being only 4, asked when Gan would come back from heaven. William gently explained that people do not come back from heaven, but they stay in our hearts forever. He showed Louis how to put his hand over his heart and feel it beating. He told him that Gan's love was right there inside him. George, being the oldest, asked practical questions. He wanted to know about the funeral and what would happen next. William answered each question honestly but simply. He explained that many people would come to say goodbye to Gan because she was very special to the whole country. That evening, William suggested they do something special to remember the Queen. Each child drew a picture to put in her coffin. Charlotte drew the Queen with her horses. Louis drew a big heart with their family inside. George drew the Queen wearing her crown, but smiling like she did during their private moments together. William carefully folded each drawing and promised the children that these would stay with Gan forever. As he tucked them into bed that night, each child asked him to tell them one more story about their great-grandmother. William sat in the dim light of their bedrooms, sharing memories and making sure his children knew they were loved and safe, even when sad things happened. It was a crisp Saturday morning in October when Prince William found himself standing on the sidelines of a muddy football pitch. His 10-year-old son George was playing in his first big match for the school team. William had cleared his entire schedule for this day. No royal duties, no meetings, no ceremonies. Today he was just George's dad. William wore old jeans and a warm jacket, trying to blend in with the other parents. He had even worn a baseball cap pulled low over his face, hoping people might not recognize him right away. But it was hard to hide when you were the future King of England, even at a children's football match. The other parents had been polite when William arrived. They said hello and made small talk about the weather and their children's excitement for the game. William appreciated how they treated him normally, not making a big fuss or asking for photos. He could tell they were trying to give him and George a regular family experience. George looked nervous as he ran onto the field in his bright blue jersey. William could see his son scanning the crowd until their eyes met. William gave him a big thumbs up and shouted encouragement. George smiled and waved back, looking more confident now that he knew his dad was watching. The first half of the game was intense. Both teams played hard, but neither side managed to score a goal. George was playing midfielder, running back and forth across the field. William found himself getting caught up in the excitement, shouting instructions and cheering for good plays. He had completely forgotten about being royal. During halftime, William bought hot chocolate for several parents who were standing near him. One mother mentioned how cold her hands were, so William shared his thermos of tea with everyone around him. Soon he was deep in conversation about football strategies and which players showed the most promise. The second half started with even more energy. George's team was pressing forward, looking for that first goal. William was pacing along the sideline now, too excited to stand still. When George got the ball and started running toward the goal, William held his breath. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. George dodged one defender, then another. The goal was right in front of him. The crowd went quiet. George pulled back his right foot and kicked the ball as hard as he could. The ball sailed past the goalkeeper and hit the back of the net. William exploded with joy. He forgot completely where he was and who he was supposed to be. He jumped up from the bench and shouted at the top of his lungs, "That's my boy. That's my son." His voice was so loud that parents from both teams turned to look at him. But William did not care. He was clapping and cheering and high-fiving complete strangers. One father slapped him on the back and said, "Your boy's got real talent." William beamed with pride and agreed enthusiastically. When another parent offered him a celebratory beer from a cooler, William accepted without hesitation. After George's goal, William became the most enthusiastic parent on the sideline. He cheered for good plays from both teams. He encouraged the goalkeeper when he made a great save. He even helped the referee pick up the ball when it went out of bounds. When the final whistle blew and George's team had won 2-1, William ran onto the field like all the other parents. He scooped George up in his arms and spun him around. Both of them were laughing and talking at the same time, George excitedly describing every moment of his goal. The ice cream van arrived just as the celebration was winding down. Without thinking twice, William bought ice cream for every child on both teams. He stood there in his muddy jeans, grass stains on his jacket, handing out treats and congratulating young players. One parent later told a friend, "For those 2 hours, I completely forgot he was going to be king someday. He was just George's dad, proud as any of us would be." The photo that appeared in the newspaper the next day showed William lifting George onto his shoulders, both of them grinning widely and covered in mud, looking like the happiest father and son in the world. The spring afternoon started perfectly for the royal family. William had taken George, Charlotte, and Louis to their favorite local park for a regular family outing. Kate was at home resting, and William wanted to give the children some fresh air and fun time outside. The park was usually quiet, with just a few local families around. 7-year-old Charlotte was excited to try the new swings that had been installed. She wore her favorite pink dress and had insisted on bringing her small backpack with snacks and her favorite stuffed animal inside. George and Louis ran ahead to claim the best spots on the playground equipment. Everything was going well until William noticed several photographers hiding behind trees and bushes around the park. They had somehow found out about the family's plans and were taking pictures from a distance. William tried to ignore them at first, hoping they would respect the family's private time. Charlotte was having the time of her life on the swings. She was laughing and calling out to her father to watch her go higher and higher. William was pushing her gently, making silly faces each time she swung toward him. This was exactly the kind of normal childhood moment he wanted his children to experience. But the photographers started moving closer. They began using bigger cameras with long lenses, and William could hear the clicking sounds getting louder. Charlotte noticed the noise too and started looking around nervously. She asked her father why people were taking pictures of them when they were just playing. William felt his protective instincts kick in immediately. He had grown up with constant media attention, and he remembered how scary and confusing it could be as a child. He had promised himself that his children would have a different experience. They deserved to play and be children without feeling like they were always being watched. When one photographer stepped out from behind a tree to get a better shot of Charlotte on the swings, William knew he had to act. He calmly but firmly walked over to the man and positioned himself between the camera and his daughter. His voice was polite but very serious when he spoke. "She's just a little girl who wants to play on the swings," William said clearly. "I'm asking you to please give her some space to be a child." The photographer looked surprised but nodded and stepped back. William made sure to speak loudly enough that all the other photographers could hear his message too. William returned to Charlotte, who was now standing quietly by the swings looking worried. He knelt down to her level and spoke softly so only she could hear. He told her that some people were very curious about their family, but that she should not worry about them. He promised that he would always keep her safe and that she could keep playing. For the next hour, William made sure to stay between his children and any cameras. He pushed Charlotte on the swings, helped Louis climb the monkey bars, and played catch with George. Every few minutes, he would make funny faces or tell jokes to make his children laugh and forget about the photographers. Charlotte later told her mother that Daddy had made the scary camera people go away. She said she felt safe again once her father stood up for her. William realized that this was one of the most important parts of being a parent, making sure his children felt protected and secure. As they walked back to their car, Charlotte held William's hand tightly. She looked up at him and said, "Thank you for keeping me safe, Daddy." William squeezed her hand and promised that he would always be there to protect her, no matter what. The simple trust in his daughter's voice made William more determined than ever to give his children the childhood they deserved. The day of Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee celebration was one of the biggest events in British royal history. Thousands of people filled the streets around Buckingham Palace, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family on the famous balcony. 4-year-old Prince Louis had been excited about the day for weeks, though he did not fully understand what all the fuss was about. William and Kate had tried to prepare their youngest son for the crowds and noise, but nothing could really get a 4-year-old ready for the overwhelming experience of standing in front of thousands of cheering people. Louis had been well behaved during the morning events, but by afternoon he was getting tired and cranky. When the family stepped onto the balcony, the roar from the crowd below was deafening. Louis immediately covered his ears and pressed himself against his mother's leg. The noise was so loud that even the adults felt overwhelmed. William could see that Louis was getting upset and might start crying in front of all those people. The military flyover was scheduled to happen at any moment. William knew the jets and helicopters would be even louder than the crowd. He watched as Louis looked up at the sky nervously, still covering his ears with his small hands. William realized he needed to do something to help his son feel better. Instead of telling Louis to behave properly for the cameras, William decided to join him. He bent down to Louis's level and whispered something funny in his ear. Louis giggled and whispered something back. William started making silly faces and Louis began copying him. Soon both father and son were making the same goofy expressions. When the jets roared overhead, the noise was incredible. Louis covered his ears again, but this time he was laughing instead of crying. William covered his own ears and made an exaggerated, surprised face. Louis thought this was hilarious and started making even sillier faces back at his father. The crowd below had noticed what was happening and began laughing and pointing. Instead of being embarrassed, William decided to have even more fun with it. He and Louis began a competition to see who could make the funniest face. They stuck out their tongues, crossed their eyes, and made ridiculous expressions at each other. Queen Elizabeth, standing nearby, was trying not to laugh at her great-grandson and grandson's antics. She kept her formal expression for the cameras, but William could see her eyes twinkling with amusement. Kate was smiling widely, clearly enjoying watching her husband and youngest son having such a good time together. The photographers were having a field day capturing every moment of Louis and William's balcony performance. The images would become some of the most popular photos from the entire Jubilee celebration. People around the world would share the pictures, talking about how refreshing it was to see the royal family being so natural and fun. Louis eventually got so comfortable that he started waving enthusiastically at the crowd below. He blew kisses and made thumbs-up gestures. William encouraged him, waving along and pointing out different sections of the crowd for Louis to acknowledge. The 4-year-old was no longer scared or overwhelmed. He was having the time of his life. Later that evening, as William was putting Louis to bed, his son asked if they could do the funny face game again tomorrow. William promised they could play it any time Louis wanted. He realized that some of the best parenting moments happened when you threw away the rule book and just focused on making your child happy. The next day, newspapers around the world ran headlines about Prince Louis steals the show and the royal family's most human moment. But for William, the best part was knowing that his son would remember the day as fun and special, not scary or overwhelming. That was worth more than any perfect royal appearance. The news hit William like a punch to the stomach. Kate's doctor had called them both into his office on a gray March morning in 2024. The words cancer and chemotherapy seemed to echo in William's head long after they left the hospital. His wife, his partner, the mother of his children, was facing the fight of her life. That night, after they had told the children that Money was sick and would need special medicine to get better, William lay awake staring at the ceiling. He realized that overnight, his entire world had changed. He would need to be strong for Kate, calm for the children, and somehow keep their family life as normal as possible. The next morning began William's new reality. Kate was too tired and sick from the treatment to handle the usual morning routine. William got up early to pack school lunches, a job he had watched Kate do hundreds of times, but had never done himself. He stood in the kitchen, trying to remember if Charlotte liked jam or honey on her toast. George found his father in the kitchen, struggling with the coffee machine. "Mummy usually makes it differently," George said helpfully. William smiled and asked his son to teach him the right way. Soon they were working together, George explaining each step while William followed his instructions carefully. The school run became William's daily challenge. He had to learn the route, remember which child needed which bag, and know the names of teachers and friends. Other parents were kind but curious, wondering why they were suddenly seeing the future king of the school gates every morning instead of Kate. Bedtime stories were another new responsibility. Kate had always been the one to read to Charlotte and Louis, while William helped George with homework. Now William found himself sitting on Charlotte's bed, reading about princesses and fairies with voices and expressions that made his daughter giggle. William discovered that he had Charlotte's hair ribbons in his jacket pocket, George's football boots in his car, and Louis's favorite stuffed animal in his briefcase. He was constantly prepared for whatever his children might need at any moment. Other parents began to recognize him not as a prince, but as a fellow parent doing his best. At school events, William appeared alone, but always made sure to wave at other parents and teachers. He wanted everyone to know that their family was managing well, even though Kate could not be there. He attended every sports day, school play, and parent meeting, taking notes to share with Kate later. The hardest part was the nights when Kate felt too sick to eat dinner with the family. William would sit at the table with the 3 children, trying to keep conversation light and normal. He would tell them stories about his day, ask about their friends, and make sure they felt loved and secure. William learned to braid Charlotte's hair by watching YouTube videos on his phone. He practiced making Louis's favorite snacks and discovered which cartoons helped distract them when they were worried about their mother. He became an expert at quick, encouraging hugs and reassuring smiles. One evening, a teacher pulled William aside after a school event. She mentioned that she had noticed he always seemed to have everything the children needed, even small things like Charlotte's extra hair tie or George's forgotten water bottle. William realized that being prepared had become his way of showing love and care. The months of treatment were exhausting for the whole family, but William never complained. He knew that Kate was fighting much harder than he was. His job was to hold everything together, to be the steady presence their children could count on. He discovered strengths he never knew he had and a deep appreciation for everything Kate had always done. When Kate finally finished her treatment and started feeling better, William continued doing many of the things he had learned. He still packed lunches sometimes, still braided Charlotte's hair, still did bedtime stories. He had discovered that being a hands-on father was not just helpful during a crisis. It was one of the most rewarding parts of his life. Christmas morning 2024 at Sandringham Estate was going to be different. William had been planning his surprise for weeks, ever since Louis had asked him if Santa Claus was real. Instead of giving a complicated answer, William had decided to become Santa Claus himself, at least for one magical morning. William had been secretly practicing his ho-ho-ho laugh in his car during drives to royal engagements. He had watched YouTube videos about how to act like Santa and had even learned a few simple magic tricks. Kate thought he was being silly, but she loved seeing how excited he was about creating magic for their children. The red Santa suit had arrived by special delivery a week before Christmas. William tried it on in their bedroom, and Kate burst out laughing. The suit was too small around his tall frame, and the fake beard kept slipping down his face. But William was determined to make it work. On Christmas Eve, after the children were asleep, William spent hours setting up the living room. He arranged presents under the tree, ate the cookies the children had left out, and even left muddy boot prints leading from the fireplace to the tree. Kate helped him get into the Santa costume and adjust the beard so it stayed in place. At 6 in the morning, William heard little feet running down the hallway. The children always woke up early on Christmas morning, too excited to sleep any longer. This was his moment. He quickly put on the red hat and made sure the beard was straight. When George, Charlotte, and Louis burst into the living room, they stopped dead in their tracks. There was Santa Claus himself, sitting in their father's favorite chair, holding a large sack of presents. William's heart pounded as he waited to see if his disguise would work. Ho, 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 William boomed in his deepest voice. Have you children been good this year? Louis's eyes went wide with amazement. Charlotte looked suspicious but excited. George seemed to be studying Santa's face very carefully. William had prepared for this moment. He pulled out a long scroll and pretended to read from it. Let me see. George, you helped your father with the garden this summer. Charlotte, you shared your toys with your brothers. And Louis, you learned to tie your own shoes. The children were impressed that Santa knew so much about them. The magic trick William had practiced involved making the candy cane appear from behind Louis's ear. When it worked perfectly, Louis gasped and clapped his hands. Even Charlotte seemed convinced that this might really be Santa Claus. As they opened presents, William stayed in character. He told stories about the North Pole and asked the children about their favorite Christmas cookies. His voice was getting hoarse from the deep Santa voice, but he did not want to break the spell. Charlotte was the first to figure it out. During a quiet moment, she whispered to William, Santa, you sound a lot like my daddy today. Instead of denying it, William winked at her. Charlotte understood immediately and decided to help keep the magic alive for her younger brothers. Oh, Santa, Charlotte said loudly, you do sound like Daddy. Maybe all daddies sound like Santa on Christmas morning. Louis nodded seriously, accepting this explanation completely. George still looked skeptical, but was enjoying the game too much to spoil it. William spent the entire morning in the red suit, helping the children organize their new toys and playing games with them. Queen Camilla arrived for Christmas breakfast and found them all on the floor, with Santa William teaching Louis how to work his new remote control car. The funniest moment came when William tried to eat breakfast while wearing the fake beard. Bits of scrambled egg kept getting caught in the white whiskers, and the children thought this was hilarious. Kate had to help him eat his toast without making a mess. By lunchtime, William was exhausted but happy. The children had spent the morning believing in magic, and he had been the one to create it for them. When he finally took off the Santa suit, Louis hugged him and said, "Thank you for bringing Santa to our house, Daddy." Later that evening, as William and Kate were cleaning up wrapping paper and toys, Kate told him it had been the most joyful Christmas morning their family had ever experienced. William realized that sometimes the best gift you can give your children is not something you buy in a store, but the time and effort you put into making their dreams come true. On George's 10th birthday, William had a special surprise planned. Instead of the usual party with friends and cake, he wanted to take his son somewhere that would teach him something important about life. William had been thinking about how to help George understand what it meant to have privilege and responsibility. The homeless shelter in London was not the kind of place most people would choose for a birthday celebration. But William believed that George needed to see how other families lived, especially families who had lost their homes and were struggling to survive. He wanted his son to understand that being a prince meant helping people, not just enjoying the benefits. George was nervous as they walked up to the shelter's front door. He had never been anywhere like this before. William explained that they were going to help serve meals to families who did not have kitchens of their own. George asked quietly if the people inside would be scary or dangerous. William knelt down to George's level and explained that the people in the shelter were just like their family, but they had experienced hard times. Some had lost their jobs, some had gotten sick and could not pay their bills, and some had other problems that made it impossible to keep their homes. They were not scary people. They were people who needed help. The shelter director, Mrs. Patterson, showed William and George around. George saw families with children his own age living in small rooms with just a few belongings. He watched mothers trying to help their children with homework at tiny tables. He saw fathers looking tired and worried. When it was time to serve lunch, William and George put on aprons and stood behind the serving counter. George's job was to hand out rolls and butter while William served the main dishes. At first, George was shy and just smiled at people without saying anything. William showed George how to make eye contact with each person and ask how they were doing. He demonstrated how to listen when people wanted to talk and how to treat everyone with respect and dignity. George watched his father joke with the children and ask the adults about their day. One family particularly caught George's attention. There was a mother with 2 young children, a boy about George's age and a little girl who reminded him of Charlotte. The mother looked very tired, and the children seemed sad and quiet. George asked his father why they looked so unhappy. William explained that this family had lost their home when the mother got sick and could not work anymore. The children had to leave their school and their friends. They were staying at the shelter while their mother looked for a new job and tried to find a new place to live. George was quiet for a long time, thinking about this information. Finally, he asked his father a question that showed he was really understanding the situation. Why do some children have big bedrooms and lots of toys while other children have to sleep in one room with their whole family? William was proud of his son for asking such a thoughtful question. He explained that life was not always fair, and that some people had more advantages than others. He told George that this was exactly why their family had a responsibility to help. Because they had been given so much, they needed to share and help others who had less. After they finished serving lunch, George asked if he could play with some of the children in the shelter's recreation room. William watched as his son shared his handheld video game with kids who did not have any toys of their own. George listened to their stories and told them about his school and his hobbies. When it was time to leave, George surprised his father by taking out his birthday money that he had brought to spend on himself. He handed it to Mrs. Patterson and asked if she could use it to buy something special for the children at the shelter. William felt tears in his eyes as he watched his son make this generous decision. On the drive home, George was unusually quiet. Finally, he asked when they could come back to the shelter. He wanted to help serve meals again and play with the children who did not have many toys. William promised they would return soon, and that helping others would always be an important part of George's life. That evening, as William tucked George into his comfortable bed in their large, warm house, his son asked one more question. "Daddy, when I grow up and become king, will I be able to help make sure all children have homes?" William smiled and told George that helping people would be the most important part of his job as king, and that asking questions like that showed he was already becoming a good leader. The evening walk through Windsor Great Park had become a family tradition. It was one of the few times William could take his children somewhere without too much security or attention. The park was large and quiet, with beautiful old trees and peaceful paths where they could talk and play together. On this particular evening in late spring, Charlotte had been unusually quiet during dinner. William could tell something was bothering his 8-year-old daughter, but she had not wanted to talk about it in front of her brothers. Now, as they walked along the familiar path, William decided to ask her what was wrong. Charlotte looked up at her father with serious eyes and asked a question that made William's heart skip a beat. "Daddy, what will happen to our family when you become king? Will you still have time to be my daddy?" Her voice was small and worried, and William realized she had been thinking about this for a long time. William felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. This was the question he had been dreading, but also the one he had been preparing for his entire life. He knew that his children would eventually have to understand that their father's role would change dramatically when he became king, but he had hoped to have more time before they started worrying about it. He knelt down on the path so he was at Charlotte's eye level. George and Louis stopped playing and came over to listen, sensing that this was an important conversation. William looked at each of his children and made a promise that came from the deepest part of his heart. "No matter how busy or important my job becomes," William said clearly, "I will always be your daddy first. That will never change, no matter what crown I wear or what duties I have to do." He could see the relief beginning to show in Charlotte's eyes, but he knew he needed to say more. William explained that being king would mean he had to help take care of the whole country, just like he took care of their family. But he promised that family dinners would still happen every night when possible. He would still help with homework, still attend school events, and still make time for their evening walks. George, being the oldest, asked practical questions about how this would work. He wanted to know if they would have to move to a different house, and if William would have to travel more. William answered each question honestly, explaining that some things would change, but the most important things would stay the same. Louis, being only 5, was more concerned about immediate things. He asked if Daddy would still read bedtime stories and if they could still play their favorite games. William assured him that these special times together would continue, no matter what other responsibilities he had. As they continued walking, William told his children about his own father, King Charles, and how he had balanced being king with being a father and grandfather. He explained that the royal family had learned over the years that being a good parent was just as important as being a good king. Charlotte asked if she and her brothers would have to do more royal duties when William became king. William explained that they would gradually take on more responsibilities as they got older, but only when they were ready. He promised that their childhood would be protected and that they would always have choices about their futures. The conversation turned to what kind of king William wanted to be. He told his children that he wanted to be a king who cared about people's problems and tried to help solve them. He wanted to be a king who listened to young people and cared about the environment. Most importantly, he wanted to be a king who showed that families were the most important thing in the world. As the sun began to set, Louis asked if he could ride on William's shoulders for the walk back to their car. William lifted his youngest son up and continued the conversation, while George and Charlotte walked beside him. He told them stories about their great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, and how she had managed to be both a queen and a loving grandmother. Charlotte seemed much happier now, but she had one more question. She asked if William would still make silly faces and tell funny jokes when he was king. William laughed and immediately made one of his goofiest expressions, causing all 3 children to burst into giggles. He promised that being king would never make him too serious to have fun with his children. As they reached their car, William realized that this conversation had been just as important for him as it had been for his children. He had needed to say these promises out loud, to make them real and binding. He understood that the kind of king he became would be shaped by the kind of father he chose to be. That night, as William tucked each child into bed, they each asked him to repeat his promise,